Hey guys, and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I have a very special guest. I have Tim from Pride Podiatry. Now, Tim has nearly 15 years experience as a podiatrist, and in today's podcast, we're going to discuss the key things that are important to all runners, namely running shoes, injuries, common myths about running, and how you should train. So stay tuned for all of that information. All the topics discussed in today's podcast is for informational purposes only, and you should seek the assistance of a medical professional prior to starting or changing any of your exercise regimes. Tim, welcome to the Stride Society podcast. We're grateful to have you on. I try not to do introductions because I want people to introduce themselves, tell them their story. So let's start with a little bit about Tim. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we do anything.
Oh, thank you, Taraka. And it's an honour to be invited onto the podcast at this early stage. God, where do I start? I'm a podiatrist, so I'm one of those foot people interested in feet rather than anything more than that. And I've been a runner my whole life as well. So the combination of being passionate personally about running and then helping people overcome their injuries or their concerns or their troubles with their feet, it's like a great combo for those two things. So I've been doing that for a long time here in Melbourne, and it's something that really gives me a lot of energy as well. So I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Perfect. And in terms of being a podiatrist itself, how long have you been a podiatrist for?
Nearly 15 years now, practicing as a podiatrist, all here in Melbourne. We've got a great podiatry community here in Melbourne with a lot of people who graduated out of La Trobe Uni, which is the only podiatry course, or was the only podiatry course. There's a postgraduate one that's just started up out of Monash. And so it's a close-knit community of podiatrists, and we get to know each other, help each other. Everyone's got different specialties. So there are those who work with just with kids, or those who work with diabetes-related foot diseases in the hospitals. But my passion is very much helping people who are keen to run keep running, and do that out of private practice here in Melbourne, in the city, and in Pascoe Vale.
That's perfect. And the key about this, the point of this podcast is really to get people out there running. And then if people are injured or they've got some issues around that, let's give you some solutions. It's not about stopping people running ever. So it's really, it's great for your mental health. It's great for your fitness. It's great for everything. Tell me a little bit about your running. So what does your running look like when you started? What does it look like now? And what do you think it's going to look like into the future?
Yeah. Oh, good question. Running's my happy place. Running's where I go to when I've had like a stressful day, whether it be like, busy back-to-back day in the clinic, or I teach podiatry as well. So sometimes you're talking to students and just feel like you're not resonating, or something's not going right there, or, just had things that go on in life. So like running's my escape place. It's something that I've done my entire life. My dad was a keen runner. So it sort of was like imbued as a child. Like we'd go out for a run together when I was quite little, and he would have been going very, very slow to keep up with my little feet at the time. But it's my happy place. My partner will say to me, like, if I'm ever like a little crabby around the house, like, oh, geez, are you due to go for a run? And you're like, yeah, I definitely am. I definitely am.
Two things there. So you found a great partner who just understands you inside out. That's the most important thing. But you're right about running as well. Running to me is my happy place as well. And it's an interesting, I don't even like to call it running a sport. It's like a very community-based event. And it's very humbling as well, because you're never going to be the fastest runner. Even when you think you're doing well, in every event that you run, someone always runs past you. So it's very humbling in that sense. It keeps you level-headed. And, if you look at world record speeds and things like that, even those world record champions, they don't hold it forever either. There's always, someone who can beat those times. So it's always humbling. It's very community-based. And, if we get some time, we'll talk about run clubs, but I think they are the best things since sliced bread.
Sliced bread, yeah. Well, like we're recording this like just after the Tokyo Marathon, and we've seen that Eliud Kipchoge was talking about, sometimes as a runner you have a bad day, and today was a bad day for him, and like he still run incredible, like an absolute brilliant time, and done fantastically. But it's you're right, it's like it's not always about the clock. It's about how you're feeling and embracing the challenges of the good, the bad, the indifferent. Like running is just a thing for us to give us a little bit of something in our lives.
That's a great point. That's actually a great point. And on an anecdotal point for me, I had an event probably a year ago. It went terribly. And I was like, dismayed after it. And I'm like, I'm going to quit running and all this. But in retrospect, you look at that run and how bad I felt. I've ran even slower than that earlier in my career and felt like $1,000,000. It's so relative. You have everyone has bad days, but a bad day is also something that's relative to you. Like Eliud Kipchoge having a bad day would be the best day of my life in running.
Yeah, absolutely. I had we spent in between 2020 and 2021. We all spent a little bit more time in our houses, and we weren't able to go to the gym. And like using that hour we had outside to go for a run. During that, I was the podiatrist who ended up with an injury, like running a little bit too much, flaring up some Achilles pain that took me 12 months to rehabilitate. And so like that at the time was the most frustrating thing in my world. It's like I can't run as much as I want. And yet now it's helped me have like such a stronger connection and empathy with the people that I help with Achilles issues. But also like it gives you that different appreciation. It's like today when I'm going out for a speed session, I'll be like, I know that my Achilles can handle it. I'm going to enjoy it. Like it's, the hard times are there to help you for when you have the good times.
That's a real key message as well. Just to anyone who's going through injury or suffering from something, those hard times are when you learn what your capabilities really are. I remember even, when I started running during COVID, surprise, surprise, like everyone else did, I ran, I think I did a 2K run, then took 2 weeks off, ran 10Ks. And by the way, this is the complete worst way to do this. Took 2 weeks off and ran 12Ks. And then probably never ran 10Ks, anything over 10Ks again for about a year, because I was trying to learn how to run again. So I did, small 5-kilometer runs for about 12 months. And I remember that sort of little injury kind of niggle that I got. And I'm like, oh, well, I've got to do something. We were locked down for 2 years and all that sort of stuff. And it was that mental battle of just being able to just do a little bit less every week just to recover. And you eventually came back and, I'm older than I've ever been right now, and I've never ran as well. So that's the interesting part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the probably like the biggest mistake that all runners make, from when we first start to even when you're running at a really high level and you have a coach. Like mostly we're all going too fast too often. Like our minds want to go ahead of our bodies. We really need to slow down our runs. And like you talk to like running coaches, so much of the time it's like as they're planning out sessions, it's like trying to get long slow Ks into people's legs, and like feeling the wind in your hair as you're flying along Taraka. Like,
yes,
that's what you want to do, but it's not always what you should be doing.
No, and that's exactly right. And key point on that as well is for anyone who's going out, starting to running, and you'll never get your pace right. You'll never, have your stride right. You'll never have anything perfect. Just go out and run. And when you get exhausted, try and walking's fine. Walking's perfectly fine. But if you can, try slow it right down to a very slow pace. I think that's how you learn how to pace yourself as well. There's a lot of people that get out there, run, and say, I can only run 500 meters because they're exhausted, because they're literally running at the top end of their capacity at that period of time. And until you learn that pace, maybe try and slow it down a bit more and try and get the distance out and get the Ks into your legs to sort of build up that capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. The zone 2 of the heart rate side of things, like that is where we've got to do most of our running. And like you could try and do the calculations. You can do your max heart rate, 220 minus your age, and then look at percentage of that. But basically, if you can maintain a conversation while you are running, that is where your heart rate is low enough that you're in your zone 2, which is like fat metabolizing, like training your mitochondria, like training your muscles, getting your Ks under your belt, that is where you want to spend most of your time. So, yeah, all of us can, if we're running with somebody else, like just slow down to the pace where we can talk as we're running. Like, yes, you're going to have a little bit of, you'll be having some deeper breaths at times, but be able to talk. Or if you're running on your own and you don't want to put your headphones in and call a friend to do that, just be one of those weirdos. I'm one of those weirdos at times. I talk things out when I run, talk to myself, and yeah, you'll be able to like get that zone 2 pace under your belt. And yeah, if you do your Ks there, you're on track. That's where so much of our running needs to be done.
Yeah, and that's a key point. I didn't even have zone 2 as a discussion point in the podcast today, but zone 2 is that year that I told you that I took off, basically didn't run a 10K run. I think my running improved so much because all of those runs were zone 2. Now, I'm a numbers person, and this is not by any means works for everyone. You got to do what works for yourself. I checked my heart rate. So I had to keep my heart rate around below 140 beats. And that's how I was able to measure my zone 2 run. But that zone 2 running pace should be about 80% of your training. When you're building up capacity, zone 2 will be the best guide on when you're not going to get injured. I think doing most of that training in zone 2 instead of where everyone starts is they start in zone 5 when they're going flat out. Try and slow it down and extend out your distances. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So with your running, are you somebody who goes for, like you mentioned, as a numbers person, like looking at the Garmin religiously as you run and you have that connection to it, or are you more feel it out and check your statistics later?
So it's interesting. It's both. So with the zone 2 runs, with my zone 2 runs, definitely I check the Garmin's, religiously. I'm actually an analyst myself, so the numbers mean a lot to me. Fortunately, I was going to say unfortunately, but fortunately they mean a lot to me. But for every other run, for example, the only things so when I do like a threshold day or a speed day, it's really a K on, K off. And that first K, I check the Garmin just for when it beeps to hit the distance. Apart from that, I don't really do any other training, any other sort of checking and tracking. After that, I do check over time to see how we're progressing and where the gaps are and how you can sort of supplement around that on an event day. But apart from that, it's really that zone 2. And just for anyone out there running as well, I found a great way to do zone 2 training. Find someone who wants to start running. This happened to me. I had a friend of mine who wanted to start running, and what we basically started doing was I said, okay, on my zone 2 day, let's run together. And it was great because some zone 2 running can be a little bit boring because it's really slow paced. But if you find someone to run with, and I think running groups and running partners are one of the greatest things that ever happened. If you find someone new to run with, you can run at their pace and you're in zone 2, whereas you're training them to build up their capacity as well. So there's that dual benefit as well.
That's a great point. That's definitely a great point. And yet it sounds counterintuitive, but it is hard to go slow, isn't it? It's really hard, like mentally hard to do.
Exactly, and it builds up your mental capacity too. Because, for example, if you've got a couple of years of training down, you could probably run a 5-kilometer run in 20 minutes. 18 to 25 minutes. That's pretty quick. But if you were doing that in zone 2, that could be 45 minutes. Like that could be 45 minutes. So say you're going from 18 to 45, the most extreme. That could be a little bit boring, but if you find someone to run with, or you've got an interesting podcast to listen to, it will help you get through that process a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not one who enjoys being inside on the treadmill runner. I love running out in the rain. It's an adventure for me, those sorts of things. However, the zone 2 times is sort of like if you've even got a little bit like, maybe I've got some papers to grade, some research papers to read or things like that. I can put that on the iPad on the treadmill and you can kind of like review and do a few things at the same time when you're doing your zone 2 runs. If you need to be inside or you enjoy running on the treadmill as well, there certainly are some people out there not gonna pass judgment if you like being on the belt. That's a great place to still get your running done.
That's a great anecdote. Like, I think that's a great thing as well. Again, I'm personally not a big fan of the belt itself, but if you do that, I think that's actually a great way to actually do a zone 2 run, and it'll measure, in terms of getting speed and all that sort of stuff. The belt will definitely help with all of that sort of stuff. So pacing yourself is a good way to do that, and you've got the iPad and you can do all your work as well. Leading into that, I thought let's talk about a little couple of issues that always come up with runners. And I thought the first common question is, common issues that you see that runners face. So you've got a new patient coming. They generally come in after the injury, right? No one ever comes in pre-injury, right?
No. There are some proactive people out there that come in beforehand, and that can be like a really interesting consult to get into. But majority of people, they're not coming to you saying, "Oh, Tim, my podiatrist, I'm running too fast. I need to do more zone 2 running." They're coming in with like, "Tim, this hurts, and it's stopping me run fast, and I want to run fast." And so, yeah, I was having to think about this. Like, the single most common reason when someone comes through, they'll say, "My heel hurts." That's the biggest one. Like, heel pain is the big one. And there are two conditions that are very, very common for runners there, and that's your Achilles tendon problems or your plantar fascial problems. And then being podiatrists, we also see a lot of people who have forefoot pain. So the ball of the foot, the forefoot. These are painful conditions, musculoskeletal things like bunions, neuromas, bursitis, and stress fractures across the forefoot would be sort of the four main ones there. And then lastly, we still see a lot of people who have knee pain. And as podiatrists, we have a really important role to play in helping people who have knee pain. So that patellofemoral joint pain is a big one. However, I work closely with some brilliant physiotherapists. And if I, think of me as the non-podiatrist layperson hurt my knee, my first port of call would be to go see a physiotherapist. And it's usually when the physio does their assessment, like, okay, here are some of the factors I need you to change to Raka, and okay, here's what I think you should talk to a podiatrist about and addressing these other factors. So yeah, heel, toes, what I mean by forefoot, and then knees would be like the three big pain points that people come in to see us.
Perfect. And I actually really like that that approach that you take as well with the knee pain as well. Like, it's a the body's not single cells. It's not a silo in any sense of the word. So working with the physios to actually work out what part helps the knee, what part helps the foot. I think that's a very sort of more of a holistic approach to looking at things. So let's talk a little bit about the foot as a starting point. So heels, toes, or forefoot. Let's start with heel. What's the biggest cause that you've seen with, is it plant? I always pronounce this incorrect.
Yeah, go. This is a safe place. Yes. Plantar fasciitis. That's the most common way of saying it. Plantar fasciosis, plantar fasciopathy. It's essentially just like different ways of saying it, and sort of like gets more anatomically correct. So like us foot nerds are like, oh, it's definitely plantar fasciosis because itis means inflammation and it's not an inflammatory condition. But like, hey, if everybody knows it as plantar fasciitis, like, let's just call it that, because then we've got a shared language and we can move forward on like, okay, why is it there and how do we get it better? And that's sort of like the next part of it then.
Perfect. Unanimously, it is now known as plantar fasciitis.
Yeah. Or like plantar fasc. Yeah,
plantar fasc. That's even better.
Yeah. Plantar fasc is heel pain directly under the heel, and it can spread a little bit forwards towards the arch of the foot. And it's got an interesting pattern, particularly for runners. Most of the time, when we're in the early days of suffering from some plantar fasc, we don't have much pain when we're actually running. It's not something that during the run causes issues. But when you stop running, cool down, maybe you're sitting down having a coffee at the end of your run, and then you go to stand up again, you'll feel like a sharp, feel like you've stepped on something underneath your heel, like, piece of Lego underneath the center of your heel, that sort of sharpness. And that'll get you the next morning too. So if you're running on your Monday, feeling good through your run, Monday night, you sit down, have your dinner, and you go stand up and you're like, oh, shivers, I stepped on something. Oh, there's nothing there. And then Tuesday morning, you're like, oh, shit, there, it's underneath my foot again, that sharp sensation. This is most likely to be a plantar fascial injury.
as we call it
Very
now.
good. Very good.
What are the main reasons people get plantar fasciitis? What's the common, is there a common reason that it occurs?
Running too fast? No. So so the plantar fascia is this elastic tissue that provides some energy storage and energy return. So it's not one that is like highly contractile like your muscles, where you've got to consume fuel, metabolize it, and then have that muscle contract. It's essentially this energy storage and release spring that we have underneath the bottom of the foot. So anytime you load it too much, particularly if it's a type of load that it doesn't like, it's got a threshold, and once you've crossed into that overloaded, overtrained, past the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would talk about, that's usually where you're going to be stuck in that danger pain zone for a period of time.
Right. And in terms of the causes of that, is the main reason as a result of that basically running too fast, or is it more of is it a structural problem with your running, as in your running form is, your heel striking, for example, your strides are too long or something like that?
Oh, usually it's too much volume with some sort of mechanical reason behind it. So every runner that's ever been and like on any forum or bought a shoe from a technical retailer or read what Asics or Nike are saying about their shoes, they'll be familiar with the word pronation. Like that's definitely a word that we've heard, and it's been kind of overused, and a lot of people has quite like a nocivic and negative connotation of pronation. However, it's vital. It's shock absorption. You need to do some pronation, and so with plantar fascial injuries, essentially, if your heel is tilting either too far in towards the big toe or too far out when you're doing that energy release phase of it, that puts a type of stress. Gets like, you mentioned you're an analytics man. I'd studied engineering prior to podiatry, so this puts a compressive stress into the plantar fascia, and the plantar fascia doesn't like that compressive stress. It loves tensile stretching type stress. So yeah, too much volume, and then if you've got that extra factor of too much tilting in or out, is usually where you're going to cross over into the pain and danger zone. And so the treatment wise, to try and settle that down, the thing that no runner wants to hear is decreased volume. So that's the thing that you're like, oh, hold on, I don't want to do that. So usually we can maintain volume, but at a slower pace, so that we're training in our ideal training zones for that bulk of the time. And then it's addressing that tilt in or out, depending which way your body lines up, to reduce the amount of compressive stress and just allow the tensile stress, the good stress, to go through that plantar fascia. And that's something you can adjust with strapping, with different sorts of shoes, with orthotics, so arch supports, things that sit underneath the feet. And so that's the way to like have your success, enjoy your runs, keep building up your cardiovascular fitness, clearing your mind, all of those reasons that you run, but overcome the injury itself.
Is a great explanation, and some actual strategies that people can actually implement in terms of if they've got that issue. Now, back to a point that you that you mentioned, and I know I laughed when you said that no runner wants to reduce volume. It's such a pathological thing that we have in our head. I had the same issue. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was doing, I was running about 70 kilometers a week, right?
Fantastic. And that's good running, Drago.
Thank you. And I went and seen a running coach because I wanted to do some, so I've got a couple of marathons booked, and I said, look, let's get some strategies around that. And their first strategy that they gave me was reducing your running load. And I was just sitting there looking, and I'm like, I don't think I'm reducing my running load at all, actually. But what was interesting about that is I had a small event, which was a half marathon coming up, and that meant I had to taper for that week. And that week of tapering, I sort of got back into that mental state of, okay, it's okay to go backwards a little bit. The last thing you want to do is keep your running volume all the way through to the day of event, and that would be a terrible outcome.
Yes.
But I tapered that week, and basically because of that, then I've rebuilt back up to what the running coach actually suggested, and they changed my training regimes and all that sort of stuff around. But for anyone watching this and you've got an injury or something like that, it's okay to reduce your Ks or, slow down a bit. You don't have to PB every single race. I think that's a critical thing that I can absolutely, sort of attest to as well. I used to track everything and had to PB every run, and then stopped tracking for about 12 months because it was actually getting pathological to a state as well. So that's
Yeah, it is a thing in Strava with the community side of things. Like there is in some places, and like I'll admit my mind goes here at times. Is like when you're logging your slow runs, your zone 2 runs, you're like, oh, people are going to be looking at that pace and like, oh, that's not a quick pace for Tim. That's not a quick pace for Taraka. But like, no. True runners know. True runners know. Like you're logging those high 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minute Ks for your zone 2 runs. Like that's where you got to be giving your kudos on. That's the run to really celebrate.
I totally agree with that, and that's a key thing about Strava. I tell all my friends, I'm actually not on Strava. I only use my Garmin app to track all my runs, and it gives me all the analytics I need, and I don't need to tell anyone about it. But it's not having going at anyone on Strava. I think Strava is a great app and all of that sort of stuff, but understand a little bit about Strava as well. It is a bit of social media as well. It's like social media for runners and riders and that as well. And don't feel bad, if you're tracking your runs and all that sort of stuff, and you're doing your slow runs. Don't get into that mindset that people are looking at your runs and saying, "Oh, that's a really, really, really slow run for Taraka and Tim. God, they ran, sub 5 minute Ks last week, and what are they doing at a 7 minute K for?" That's not the sort of environment that running is conducive of. And it's not really running in itself. I don't think I can't recall looking at, even when I had Strava, looking at someone's runs and saying, you know what, John ran a really slow run that week. And even if I did do that, I can't remember it. So they're kind of little mindsets that we have as well. So going backwards a little bit as well.
Oh yeah, that's the psychology of the spotlight effect, isn't it? Like we all have that spotlight on us. We all think everybody's thinking of us all the time, and yet we're just going about our lives, bouncing into each other and like having an interaction, and then off we go on our next part of it.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to sort of to sort of lead into the next phase of that. But that is a great message to lead in with. And I think some of the information you gave about strapping, making sure getting your technique right and all that. Do you advise anyone to actually get, if they do have plantar fasciitis issues, to sort of get some testing done, or is it generally, do you start with reducing some volume, going slower, and then start some testing?
The thing that I say here is like could be misconstrued as genuine medical advice. So here's what I would do in this situation. Here's me. What I would do in this situation. I'm somebody who likes to try and solve my own problems first. I get a lot of like intrinsic joy out of that, but I also know that there are other people out there who know more about my problem than what that is. So I would do a little bit of research. I would have a look at see what's going on forums. I would Google things. I would come up with some like, okay, what are some factors that I think I can change? And if I have lots of time and potentially a little bit of money behind my resources to do that, perhaps I would go and get a new pair of shoes and go to a specialty running store and have somebody there who knows more about shoes than me. Perhaps I would try a few different strapping techniques out there. There are some strapping techniques. I could even share you a link for the show notes of like certain podiatrists use for plantar fascial injuries as well, Taraka. So there are things out there that I would put in place myself. If it was something that lasted longer than 6 weeks, 6 weeks is the time that, like, if you've got a niggling injury that's going for that period of time, I'd really want to be seeing someone about that, because a couple of things happen at around 6 weeks mark of an injury. Number one, pain, that beautiful emergent process that's really important to us, that tells us where danger is and things like that. It's something that your body can train. And if you have had a consistent area of pain for more than 6 weeks, the part of your brain that is responsible for learning and understanding and react to pain is being trained like your muscles are being trained. And so it's going to become more sensitive to those problems in the future. So if you've got an injury that's lasting longer than 6 weeks, like definitely you need to be getting on top of that one, because you don't want to be, training this neurological pathway and training that pain center in your brain, to be more sensitive to that or other injuries in the future. And number two is, okay, so getting into the physiological side of things, whenever we have an injury in our body, there are these things called mast cells. Mast cells are essentially they're the foreman on the job site. Like, you're building something, you've got a construction project. The foreman is there to say, all right, Chippy's over here, plaster is over there, demo there, like organizing all of the structures. And mast cells do that for injuries in our body. And like foremen, they're not there for the whole time. They clock off at 6 weeks. And so if you've had an injury process that's been going long and it's 6 weeks of this niggle, you want to make sure that you have got some mast cells active, so that whatever rehabilitation process that you're putting in place, they're going to be there to tell yourselves, okay, all right, we need to build more fascia, we need to build more tendon, we need to build muscle in this order. I need to clear out some scar tissue. So yeah, if you're hitting that 6 week mark and it's still a problem, that's where I definitely would be going to see, if it's a foot or ankle injury, going to a podiatrist. If it's a knee injury, I'd be starting off heading to the physiotherapist. Hips, muscle injuries higher up, heading to the physiotherapist for those ones.
Absolutely. And just for anyone watching this right now as well, in line with the disclosure at the start of it, none of this is medical advice. This is just general advice, information for you to gather. And, always work with a registered consultant, a medical professional, for any issues that you have.
Good. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah. Like this is I'm really hoping that we can help some people, like have some great runs and things like that. And part of being a professional is that like, here's what I would do, and then here is just like the risks associated with doing things yourself too.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to lead into. So we've now talked about the back of the foot or the heel. So what are the common issues you get with the forefront of the foot itself, or the toes, or the front of the front of the heel? Or not the front of the heel, the front of the foot.
Yeah, ball of the foot
the
sort
ball.
of area. So the big one that a lot of people associate with is bunions. This is where your big toe joint, which is the hardest working joint in your entire lower limb. So like over 8 times your body weight goes through this joint. Like, it's think how small your big toe joint is compared to your knee and compared to your hips, and yet it's working so much harder. So the bunions are where the toe starts to drift across towards the second and third toe a little bit more. Neuromas and bursitis are essentially in the middle of the ball of your foot, in between all your long metatarsals. You've got these little gaps that should be a nice space for a nerve and a bursa and a blood vessel to sit. But if they get squished too much, then they can become quite painful with this quite sharp forefoot pain that usually happens as you're going into your propulsive springing forward phase of your gait. And stress fractures are a big one too. So through the forefoot, your long metatarsals are the only long bones in the foot. And this is something that helps provide leverage, but long bones can be a little bit more susceptible to a stress reaction than the really hardy, knobbly bones that make up the heel and the midfoot.
And again, when people do have that issue itself, is it still sort of, and again, if you had that issue, let me rephrase this. If you had that same issue, would you potentially just start with, would it be a similar treatment in the sense that you'd slow down your runs and, take longer, slower runs, and then again, wait for that 6 week golden mile, or would you change the way that you would do that for yourself?
Yeah, I'd still keep that guidance initially. Like, anytime there's an injury that's at 6 weeks, like if it's still sore at that stage, that's it. Take action, do something about it. With the forefoot, with running shoes now, we're really lucky that the trend with running shoes has some features that were developed by orthotic therapy first to take the stress away from the forefoot. So you could be going shoes with a little bit more of a forefoot rocker. So, when you place your running shoes on the ground, they kind of, like, if you push them at the heel, they almost just want to go forwards because they've got that curve underneath the toes. Going to shoes with like bigger forefoot rockers and potentially some stiffening plates underneath the forefoot as well. So we're talking your carbons or your nylon plates to provide a little bit more
Yeah.
stability and less twisting stress force across the forefoot. That'll be where I'd be my first port of call if my foot was getting a little bit sore and niggly around the ball of the foot.
That's I think that's some great advice on that as well. And you actually taught me something as well. So in terms of those carbon plates on shoes, and we will talk about shoes, by the way. I think that's going to be the next cab off the rank. So the purpose of the carbon plate, my understanding, was more to get more force onto your foot, but is it more to kind of distribute the load a little bit more throughout the foot as well and sort of push it backwards?
The main okay, so we'll go back. So like for a long period of time with runners, we've all thought that, shoes are for shock absorption. We're talking about foams and support and things like that. Yeah, like that's what you're spending. When you first started running, and the flagship Kayanos, the Kayano 15s, all this beautiful cushioning foam, and you're going in and saying great shock absorption. Does that get you excited, Taraka? Is that what you're after? Yep.
I don't know.
Okay.
The more I learn about shoes, I think I'll have a different opinion once we have our conversation about shoes.
Okay. So like the foams underneath shoes, fantastic. And they can provide shock absorption. When you think about running, like for us to actually go forwards, our foot has got to be able to apply a force to the ground, and it's got to send us in a forwards direction. Otherwise, we'd just be jumping up and down on the spot if it was just a vertical force. And so the role of plates, they can help take that as we move our center of mass forward, so we're moving our hips forward over our body. They can help provide a longer lever arm to provide a little bit more leverage for us to push down and then backwards against the ground to spring us forwards. So leverage essentially is the role of the plates, particularly when we're talking about like the real super shoe, the go fast, go long types of shoes. And it like these are features that have been built into orthotics now for like the current generation of orthotics is around 15 to 20 years old, about the biomechanical principles that underpin them. So been in orthotics for about 15, 20 years, and now have been in shoes for about 7 or 8 years. And it's fantastic because it means that a lot of people don't necessarily need to use an orthotic if they can get a shoe that's already got all those features built into it. And in the future, with more customized 3D printing and things like that, we anticipate that we'll be able to build like individualized the Taraka shoe with exactly where you need the support and the leverage, the Tim shoe. And while the top might look the same, like the midsole, the part which gives you all of your bounce, your power, and your speed, can be individualized for both of us.
That's really interesting, actually. So, interesting thing about that is, like, again, shoes with carbon plates in them are quite expensive right now. However, so are orthotics. If you get customized orthotics as well, they're quite expensive as well. And I think the difference in that as well is some of those shoes with carbon plates in them. If you do go to like a DFO in Australia or something, they do put them on sale. So there may be like actually a cost effective way to maybe, again, depends on the shoe and it depends on the person and if it's the right fit. But there are cost effective ways to actually get your shoes in that sense if you've got an issue with orthotics there as well.
Yeah. Forefoot stuff, definitely. That's what I'd be thinking about.
Definitely. Okay, so that's real. That's some great information to everyone. I think that's going to lead us into our next topic, which I'd love to discuss about, is let's talk about shoes. Let's talk all about shoes. So I'm a new runner. I want to go running. Do I just put on my high heels and go for a run, or is there a little bit more than that? How do I pick the right shoes is the question.
Yeah. Oh, as a new runner, like the first thing is to start with like why you want to run. Like if it's like, you talk about your social connection with others, if it's your like quiet time, your reflective time, like start with your why. And if your why is that there is something about a certain shoe that you want to do, like if you want to run a marathon in high heels, then you're going to be training and running a marathon in high heels. So like if you want to run a marathon barefoot, then we need to be training in that environment. But for most of us in Melbourne who have grown up like wearing shoes, running in, and like everybody having a pair of running shoes and sneakers, and usually the shoe isn't the reason why. Usually then we need to start with what we have. And so if you've got a pair of sneakers that are in reasonable condition and you start your running slow, like we were talking about initially, then let's start at a slow, low pace in your reasonably conditioned sneakers. And from there, we can adjust. If you don't have a reasonable pair of sneakers, like if they're over 12 months old, or if they've been bashed around because you've been, walking the dog in them, going to the gym in them, all these other sorts of things, then when you're starting out, it's best chance of you want to get something that is the best option for your feet within your budget. I'd head to a specialty running store. So Soul Motive is the name of one, which is based in the city. North of the river, there's the running company in Clifton Hill. There are a few running companies around, actually around Australia now as well, not just based in Melbourne. And south of the river, there's running stores like Active Feet. And these are all stores that you can go in there. The people that will help you, no shoes. They have treadmills to run on. So it's not just you're just putting the shoes on and being like, oh, the blue ones look cool and feel nice when I'm standing in store. But you'll be able to get up on the treadmill, do some comparison, run for a few minutes in the Pegasus, run for a few minutes in the Kayanos and try them and give your best chance at finding a shoe that's like a really good option for when you're starting out.
I think that's some great advice. And I think from an anecdotal perspective for me as well, when I started running, just so everyone's crystal clear, I had the worst. They weren't even running shoes. They had foam on them. And I wore them all the way down. Like the ball of the foot was pretty much almost worn all the way down. So running shoes was not something that I just thought you put any set of shoes on and then run with. It was only, to be honest, it was probably only 6 months after I started running when I thought maybe I should, throw these old pair. I wish I still had them. I'd show a link to everyone on there. But I went to a specialty running store. I got fitted for shoes, and all I've done in terms of the shoes themselves, I have bought the same pair year on year, every 3 to 4 months, depending on how many Ks you get out. Roughly, what do you think, about 600 Ks for a pair of shoes generally? Or do you think you can go a bit longer or shorter?
Oh, it massively depends. Weight of the runner, how much time the shoe gets off as well. So if you're using your shoe every single day, you will compress those foams down much quicker and you might only get 300 Ks out of a pair of shoes. And also the style of a shoe. So your thinner, lighter shoes that have got less foam base under them. We've seen Adidas come out with a $450 shoe that's for one marathon, 42K shoe. So depending on the materials there, but for most of the full thickness daily sort of longer distance running shoes, for anybody that's between the sort of 60 to 80 kilos, you'd probably get 6, maybe even 800 kilometers out of a pair of shoes, given that they get a bit of time to rest in between.
On that, so about the time when you go about it, replace shoes, I basically buy the same pair of shoes, and I always buy last season's, and it's a great way to save money on them. And I generally try and buy 2 pairs. So if you can get 6 to 800 Ks out of a pair of shoes, that may last you, 6 to 12 months with the 2 pairs of shoes, and then you can just repeat that cycle. And that's a way to sort of save money on your shoes, definitely.
Can I ask you a question on that, Taraka?
Yeah.
When you're buying 2 shoes, you're buying the same shoe?
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice. So you're doing one thing brilliantly well there, having 2 shoes to alternate between, because that gives them greater recovery time. So each shoe is going to last you more Ks. But we've got data around this. If you're running in 2 shoes and they're slightly different shoes, you are less likely to get injured. So It's really good to have 2 shoes, but have a different rotation of your shoes. And for those of us who are like me, who really like shoes, that's a great excuse to get different shoes for your.
Right.
I have my one pair that I use for my longer runs and my other pair that I use for shorter runs. A little bit more experimental for those ones. But also, if you're not you're not a shoe geek like I am, and you're interested in running and running well and avoiding injury, it would be good to get would you be able to share what's the shoe you're running in?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. So I buy 2 pairs of the same shoe, but I've got 2 pairs of shoes that I run with. So and again, there's no endorsements on any of these products or anything like that. I run in a set of Nike Pegasus.
Yeah.
And I've got a set of Asics Cumulus that I run in as well. So I alternate between the two shoes. I got fitted for the Cumulus, and then I thought I'd just try the Pegasus to see what they were like. And it's a harder, it's definitely a different feel, but I find that alternating has actually, again, I think it's actually improved my cadence. So as you track your cadence over time, and some of my form, I can sort of run at better, with a better form for a longer period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's excellent when you've got two different shoes as your running option. That's great. And yeah, the Cumulus and Pegasus are both similar functioning shoes from the brands. So like, yeah, no, that you're doing the right thing, Taraka. Well done.
Well, there you go. One of those things that you actually get right by doing it accidentally.
Yeah, yeah, nice one, nice one. Have you had the urge to try any of those shoes with the super foams in them?
I've never done the super foams, and I haven't done the carbon plates either. I have an urge to do some of the barefoot stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The really low profile. I think they're 10 or 12 mil or something. I have an urge to try them, but I think let's lead into that. In terms of those shoes with a lot lower profile, I personally have an urge to just try them and see what they're like. But again, it's something that you mentioned earlier, stress fractures. Is that a common issue that you see with shoes that are a lower profile, less foamy?
Yeah, definitely. Stress fractures. So this is not anti-barefoot anything. This is just anytime you change anything. So like, your running volume, if you went from running 70 Ks a week to 140 Ks a week, high chance of developing problems. So if you're running in a shoe that your body is very much conditioned to and used to, and then you go to a really low profile, even if you do start running actually barefoot out on the ground, you are significantly changing the forces that act around the calf and underneath the foot. So the ball of the foot and the calf Achilles heel complex are all going to work much harder. But with physics, you can't make force disappear. So something is going to be working less. And so what works less in those ones are the muscles through the anterior part of the shin. So across the shin bone there is a muscle called tibialis anterior, and where it attaches onto the top part of the foot. So, potentially if somebody was a runner who was having some very much front of the ankle, top of the shin sort of pain, then you could advise, okay, let's get into a lower drop shoe, a barefoot shoe, or into the barefoot running. Whereas somebody who was already barefoot running, if they started to have heel problems or forefoot problems, like, okay, we might need to reduce the stress on those areas, and you can use a more full thickness shoe to do those as well. And if you are healthy and uninjured in those areas and you are looking to make a change, you just you've got to do it slow. It is a significant change in the stresses on those areas. And so you really, really need to do that adaptability, very, very slow transition phase. And yeah, most of us will be able to build up that physiological adaptation and be able to handle the change, but slow. You got to do it slow.
Interesting thing about that, slow. So now, if I was going to ask you for your own advice about what you would do for yourself here, if you were going to go from a foam shoe and you wanted to try some of that low drop barefoot running, in terms of, say your volume is, let's call it 50 kilometers a week, what percentage of that, or how many Ks of that 50 would you try in a low drop shoe, and how would you increase that over time as a starting point?
Yeah, minuscule, 10%. That would be my absolute minimum starting point. I wouldn't do any more than 5 kilometers for my first run in that. It is such a big, sharp change. And injuries are not things that come good very quickly as well. So I would be on that conservative, really reduce that down, and then stick with that 10% increase in your running volume per week from that as well. So if you're doing 50 Ks a week and in one sort of style of footwear, your first week you'd be down at 5 kilometers, and it would take you a long time going 5.5, 6.25. Taraka, you're the analyst. You can do the rest of the maths on that one and extend that forwards out of that one, because it is a huge shift. So yeah, really got to go slow for that one. And so usually the reason of changing significantly from going barefoot to shod or shod to barefoot is you got to have a strong reason why you want to do that. And the same reason of why we start running, we need to find that initial reason why. And if it's a curiosity and experimentation, just be be mindful that it's going to take a very long time, or if it's a physiological need because of an injury, then you're like, we're already injured, so we're dialing that dosage down and just being prepared that it's going to take time to build back up to where you were beforehand.
Yeah, and that covers off on a couple of topics we started earlier as well. When you are injured and you're coming back from recovery, like just understand that takes time, and everything, going backwards is some way a way to go forward. So keep that in mindset. But and I like that real point of your why for doing that. If it's an injury related reason on it, then you've really just got to. You're already injured, right? You're already injured, and now you're changing something that's going to sort of put loads on your body that you're not used to. So you're not going to be adapted to it. So you really have to go slow. And if it's just out of curiosity, you don't want to get injured. you don't want to get injured. So really dial that back and then sort of increase that over time. That's actually a great summary of shoes and sort of changing it. Now, I've got a question about barefoot running as well. It's obviously come around a lot. There's actually a member in my running group who started running in 2012, he's told me, and then had a raft of injuries, and sort of in like 2000 went to barefoot running and said, I'd never run back, never go back to it. What is is there sort of an adaptive benefit of barefoot running? I guess my question is more, does it help you have a better form when you start running? Does having running shoes sort of let you get away with a bit of bad stuff because it sort of masks some of that stuff? Or is it just a phenomena that people started doing, and because everyone read Born to Run and said, all right, let's go and buy a pair of shoes. I read it and I love the book, don't get me wrong, but let's talk a little bit about barefoot running.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, nothing makes me happier to hear that somebody has like found their running journey. That's fantastic. So to your running club member who's managed to overcome their injuries and embrace being barefoot, that's awesome. That person's found their why. Like they're enjoying it. I think just the thing to remember with being barefoot versus running shoes is like the same stress is going through the body. Like gravity is the same, your body weight is the same, and then it's the amount of steps that you're taking. The stresses are there. It's just going to be in different areas. So if physiologically you've got certain areas because you've grown up wearing shoes that are stronger and more conditioned and able to handle the stress in those areas, like we talked about, when you're going barefoot, you are going to greatly increase the rear foot Achilles load as well as the forefoot load. So if you can handle that in those places and you want to make the transition to barefoot, that's great. And if you start off, if you're habitually unshod, if you don't spend a lot of time in shoes, which is less in Melbourne, but I've been lucky to travel the world and go to places where shoes or just flip-flop thongs are pretty much the go. If that's your habitual nature and then you want to build up the running, then it's a great place to continue to build up the running out of your, you can run in thongs or sandals if that's what you're used to. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that the shoes or being barefoot is like better for form or technique. It's just for like whatever you've had to start with, you're going to be more physiologically adapted to handling that. And then if you've got an injury process because you haven't had those physiological adaptations, then you need to change something. And potentially where your injuries are, moving away from shoes or towards shoes could be a good pathway to do that.
Definitely. And that's an interesting point that you talk about, running in thongs and, having that adaptation for it. We've all read Born to Run, and this is a classic example. And they talk about a tribe in the book about, the Tarahumara who run in barefoot and they're ultra runners and all this. The difference between living in Melbourne, Australia, or, in a city where we wear shoes all the time is that those tribes generally have adapted from very young ages to run in, thongs and all that. So they're adapted to it. So don't look at fads and don't look at things. Look at the situation in a holistic sense. People have actually trained towards it. And by all means, you're not saying barefoot's good or bad. Have a look at the reason why you're doing that. And then potentially if it's a training driven issue, sorry, it's an injury driven issue, then yeah, change something and see if it works. Just from your own practice, have you seen more people that are now doing the more barefoot stuff, the more zero drop shoe, or I know ultra, for example, ultra runners generally run in a lower profile barefoot shoe or a zero drop shoe, if that makes sense.
To be honest, it's kind of like fashion. Like it's cyclical. It goes around, and I wouldn't say we're in a high point right now with the
Right.
barefoot side of things. So the trends at the moment for the last 3 or 4 years have still been very much towards shod shoes. I think a lot of it is around Nike really started to become very well known, not just in the running community, but like outside of it with their Breaking Two initiatives. And so like we're talking about high stack shoes. We start seeing shoes with like the more foam underneath them getting banned in athletic meets because
Yeah.
it's proven to help you run faster and further and recover better. So like there's all this evidence piling up that this is going to be like, if it's banned, can I have the banned running shoes?
Yeah.
I'm not doping, but I'll have my shoes doped. And so we're in more of a phase towards that at the moment, whereas back towards sort of like the 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's certainly where I've seen the peak of the barefoot running
Right.
come through initially. That's where like the first version of the Vibram 5-finger
I remember them.
glove shoes started to come around. Yeah. Real strong look, aren't they, when you go out for a run in those? Turn heads.
Yeah, trust me, I see. So I run around the tan a bit, and there's some people that run barefoot, and mind you, that's gravel. So I don't know how they do that, but I've seen a couple of those barefoot, and I'm like, yeah, they're a bit, they're like toe socks, right?
Yes.
Toe socks are one of those interesting things. So interestingly, I just want to cover off on a point that you talked about, about the higher foam and shoes getting banned. So let's talk a little bit about that, because the reason is that's actually quite important for marathons as well. I think Adidas have a pair, I think Nike have a pair. There are a set of running shoes that if you do buy them, the name escapes me now, but if you get caught in a marathon in them, you will actually get banned. Now, they're quite expensive, so that you kind of got to be looking out for them. But the interesting thing is, so for example, when Elliot Kipchoge done his, world-class breaking, and I don't want to take anything away from, I absolutely love Elliot Kipchoge, the sub 2 hour marathon. Part of the reasons that it was not recognized was, first of all, the paces that he had, but it's also the shoes that he ran in as well. They were higher than the profile that is generally allowed. I don't know what the limit is. I think is it 40 mil? Do you know off the top of
43 off the top of my head. I should know that exactly, but I think it's 43 under the heel is the maximum allowed at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting you mentioned that, because barefoot running is one of those things that gets talked about a lot and all that, but again, like you were saying, it's a fashion thing. We really need to follow the science, listen to the data, and again, I think it's really important. Listen to podcasts by all means, but get your shoes fitted, find out what issues you need to get corrected. If you need to see a podiatrist, come and see someone like Tim. Make sure that everything's kind of biomechanically working when you're running, because based on my understanding, even I had these preconceptions that running ruins your knees. I used to tell people this, I'm not going to run after 50. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I used to say, and I was running. So, but it's really, inactivity is worse than running. But if you do have...
Nobody has healthier knees than old runners.
Yeah.
Running has been proven to strengthen your knees. And like even stuff around, like people will be like, oh, running on asphalt is bad for your knees. Running on asphalt is great for your knees. Like it's all like a lot of the sort of like the things that we sort of like inherently believed or like historically and sort of like just been passed down. Like I mentioned, I started running as a kid because my dad was a runner. He was coaching running, and he'd be like, all right, we're running on the grass. Like, we've got a beautiful path right next to us, but you got to run on the grass because it's better for your knees. And you're like, no, it doesn't quite work like that. As we learn a little bit more about the human body, about adaptation, and yeah, we kind of like need to continually have like that open mind to update update our understanding. That's the beautiful thing of science, isn't it?
Yes.
It's never sold. It's like, well, this is what we know now, but geez, I can't wait to learn how wrong I am in the future and get to learn something new.
It's interesting. Science and running should go hand in hand because they're very both humbling, right? You don't actually know anything. In fact, in running, you're never as good as you think you are, or you're not never as bad as you think you are. There's always that humbling experience of learning more. And trust me, I was the biggest proponent of, I'm going to run till I'm 50 and then I'm done. Like it's just it's so bad. The other thing as well. So let's just go back to that running on grass, or grass is uneven as well. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an anecdote on that. I spoke to someone who actually done an Achilles. They were running on pavement and they steered off onto the again, this is anecdote, so this is not necessarily science, but steered off onto grass to avoid someone and done an Achilles injury doing that as well. So there are some downsides to the whole running on softer grass and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I love the idea that runners with older runners have the best knees. I know of runners in their 50s that are doing ultras, like
you go to any ultra marathon. I went to the one at Flinders Peak down in the Yangs last year, and the average age there would have been well above 45 for a lot of them. And that's not saying 45 is old, but that is like we're getting into like you've got some miles under the belt if you're running at that stage. And yeah, fantastic.
Exactly. And just to add to some, we can talk about anecdotes all the time. If you look at the Spartans, so the Melbourne Marathon they're trying to make it a major marathon, and it's selling out and all that sort of stuff because running's so popular and all that. Who knows how long it's going to last? But to get a Spartan t-shirt in a Melbourne marathon, have a look at the people that wear them. They definitely are not in their 30s. You need to run 10 of those, 10 Melbourne marathons to get one of those. And in addition to that, my first ever marathon that I ran, this is when I changed my mindset a little bit. My first ever marathon was actually last year. So I was, quitting running till I was 50, when I was 50, till all the way up to last year. And until I did my first marathon, and I signed up to the early group because I wanted to make sure I had enough time and all that. I could tell you right now, the average age group of that was over 65. Like it was over 65. They inspired me. And it just goes to show. And I asked the question too. This actually made me laugh. I said, how many marathons, how many events do you guys do a year? And one lady turned around and said to me, I don't do that many anymore. I'd probably do about 3 or 4. And I'm like, 3 or 4? The others are like running 10 or 11 events a year. And I'm like, that was really eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's sorts of people I love having a chat with too. That's like, when you can have like almost the running tourism side of things as well. Like, I'm going to duck over to Tokyo. I'm going to head to, in Victoria, we've got the beautiful Great Ocean Road Marathon. Fantastic. Down between Lorne and Apollo Bay. Like, you can go to some amazing places, see some amazing scenery, and like make some great friends and connections doing it as well. That's it's a beautiful thing about the marathon community.
One last thing on marathons, and we'll get on. I think we're going to have to wrap this up soon. We're already over the hour mark, and I knew this was always going to go over the hour mark. I think we'll get into blisters and socks and stuff like that next. But are you doing the Great Ocean Road Marathon this year?
No. I run halves, not fulls.
Okay.
I will run a full one day, but it was one of those things for me. That's, I think I always said I'll do those as I get older. I'm nearing 40 now, and it's like, maybe I need to start doing those ones. So I will be away interstate for when the Great Ocean Road is. But a friend of mine has taught me to do Ballarat. So that is
right.
end of April. So I have to confirm the exact date. So that'll be the next one that I look to run.
Yeah, I think that's the 22nd of April, I think, from memory. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. I'd have to check that. So, yeah, will you head up to Ballarat to rack it?
So I'm contemplating Ballarat. The reason is I'm actually going away at the end of March for a few weeks in New Zealand for a holiday, but I've got Great Ocean Road booked and I've got Melbourne Marathon booked as well. So
Awesome.
Ballarat's sort of a nice, and I run a half every Sunday. I run a half marathon. That's my
long run.
I can't believe I even say that now because I was speaking to a friend of mine. I'm like, running a half marathon, after you've done some, and this is by all means, this took me years of training to get. It's not, don't buy the 6-week program that says learn how to run a half marathon in 2 weeks. No, that's just, that's just utter stupidity.
You'll definitely be seeing the podiatrist then if you're doing that.
Yeah, oh yeah. Call Tim before you go and take any programs. Please, we'll leave all the everything in the show notes so you can get a hold of him. But I think we digress a little bit. I think let's go into the last topic. There was a ton of other things I wanted to cover, but I think we've gone over time a little bit. But let's talk about blisters and socks and toe socks and all that. Is there a way to mitigate blisters? I guess what causes a blister? Let's start there.
Yeah.
And is there a way to mitigate?
Yeah, blisters twofold: friction and moisture. So too much friction on the skin and usually too much moisture at the time. So we get sweaty when we run, so we get a lot of moisture build up down there. So protecting them, mitigating them. If there is something like if the blister is happening above the sole of the foot, it usually relates to how your shoe is fitted. So the upper of the shoe fitting your foot exactly perfectly to your feet. And by the time you've run for about 60 minutes, your foot is swollen significantly compared to when you first started. So if the upper of the shoe is not giving in ways that accommodate the way your foot changes, then that can be an issue. And the moisture, if the friction is underneath the foot, so if you're blistering from the sole or underneath the toes, then that's usually a sign that the way your foot is moving inside the shoe is not ideal. So going back to what we talked about at the top with the plantar fasciitis, if your heel is tilting in or out a little bit too much at certain times, you can extend that to any part of your foot, any segment, the heel, the midfoot, the forefoot, moving in or out more than what is ideal, then you're going to have more friction on the sole as that interacts with the sole of the shoe, or the ground if you're running barefoot, and then you'd want to try and reduce that by making sure that the shoe is right, or having an orthotic underneath your foot to change that, or having some a strength program in place to have strengthened the muscles that would also change the way that moves. And then on the moisture level, it's about taking that moisture away from the skin and moving it off the skin as quickly as possible. And that's where technical running socks can be really helpful. So these are the, Nike Dry Fit and all of the different, high-priced socks that you can be spending $40 on a pair of them. They're designed to wick the moisture away from the skin, put it into the shoe. Sounds a bit gross, isn't it? But then it has a chance to evaporate out of the shoe as you're moving through the air as well. So it takes that sweat away and it can dry off, which can be a bit of an issue if you're in a shoe that's maybe the trail version of shoes that have got much tighter uppers or waterproof uppers, Gore-Tex, because they don't allow that moisture to actually transmit out of the shoe as effectively as what your standard lighter breathable mesh running shoes are.
That's interesting. Yeah, Gore-Tex is one of those things. I think it's got a great marketing thing. I used to be a hiker, so I used to advise people, just Gore-Tex is great for the windbreakers and stuff like that, but you don't want every jacket with Gore-Tex because when you get wet, you start sweating inside it because it doesn't breathe. I think that's a critical thing. Got a question on in terms of socks. So you've got the quick dry socks that take all the moisture out. Yeah. Is there any advantage of the things that are now coming out a little bit fashionable? And I own a pair. Full disclosure, I bought some, and I do find this is anecdotally for me personally, that my the amount of blisters I do drop a little bit when I do wear them. Toe socks. Have you had any sort of experience with people wearing toe socks? Do they create a little bit less friction? Do they take moisture out, or are they just the best marketing team in the world?
No. So a lot of the toe socks are made with breathable materials that are good at wicking the moisture. Because you've got material in between every single toe, so kind of like a glove for your hand, but for your feet, it ends up filling up more space around the forefoot. So if your foot is going to be sliding side to side and your toes have a chance to move up and down when you're just in a regular sock, when you're going to the toe sock, by taking up more space there, it tends to move a little bit less and you're less likely to have those issues as well. I guess you can kind of go from your standard socks that are you could wear on your left or your right foot. Then you can go to your technical fitted socks that you have a left one that is a little bit more contoured to your left foot and a right one that's more contoured to your right foot. And then you can go up to the toe socks, like the Injinji style socks as well, which are very much left and right, and can fill up a bit more space between the forefoot to reduce the amount of movement occurring there.
Absolutely. And to be, I bought a pair of those Ninjinjis. I thought, and again, this is all anecdote. We bought it for when we were hiking. We found that they did cause a little bit less blistering, but there's probably more than just the Ninjinjis that was causing that. Tim, that's been a great insight. I had maybe we have to do a round 2 on this. Thank you so much for coming on. There's just, you're a wealth of knowledge. What we're going to do is, if anyone wants to get a hold of Tim, you do teleconsults? Do you do, or is it only in on-site that you do consults?
In clinic consultation at the moment, but if anyone drops any DMs to our social handles, myself and I've got a couple of podiatrists that I work with, we handle those. I'd be more than happy to chat through a few things in the DMs. And I think just going back to as we were chatting, that initially is talking about the strapping. I was I've got a link to a video about strapping that can be pretty useful for plantar fascial stuff. So I'll share that with you too, Taraka, and maybe that could be something that hopefully some people out there can take something out of, can get some value out of this, and continue to enjoy running, because it's such a great.
Absolutely. And all those links are going to be at the bottom of this video, so they'll be in the show notes. And anyone, just DM me on Facebook if you don't have them or anything, and I'll send you all through Tim's links and everything like that. And like Tim said, just hit him up on his socials. He might be able to answer a few questions for you. Tim, that's been great. This has been such a wonderful podcast. It's so enlightening for me. I'm going to actually go back and review this, and what we'll do is we'll cut up sections. I know not everyone loves an hour and 10 minutes of a podcast, but what we'll do is we'll cut it up into sections. We'll talk about, the heel, the front of the foot, and the advice that Tim would do for himself, just so we're crystal clear. And again, take everything you heard on this podcast as information only. It's, in line with the disclaimers that we put through. None of this is medical advice. Speak to medical professionals about everything before you do anything. But basically, thank you so much for coming on, Tim. So what's your next event? And last thing is, what's some parting advice you'd leave to people?
Been an absolute pleasure to talk running with you. Next event will be Run Ballarat half in April, as we were saying, 20 something of April. My parting advice is for those who are currently running and looking to make a change to anything, just go back to why you started running, to make sure you find that why, and then that'll help connect with whatever change that you stick with, whether it's starting a strengthening program, starting a coaching program, changing shoes. You'll have that reason why as your starting point. And if you're just looking to get stuck into running for the first time, just think about why you want to do it, keep that front and center, and just run a bit slower.
Perfect. I think that's a great note to end this podcast on. Tim, thank you so much for coming on. And if anyone wants to contact him, links are in the bottom of the description. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Taraka. All the best.
You too. Thanks. See ya. Hey guys, I hope you found that podcast with Tim useful and you got some valuable information for your own running journey. Now, if you want to get a hold of Tim, check out the links below. It's got his contact details below, including his Instagram, where you can ask him a question directly. Now, if you want more exclusive content like that, check out the link below as well. It's my private running group. It's completely free to join. Anybody can join it. And all these podcasts are released to the running group first before they go to the general public. In the running group, you can actually ask questions to other runners at your own level about how you can start, how you can improve, whether you're a beginner or you're advanced. Now, if you find that useful, check out the link below. Join our running group. We'd love to see you there. Like always, best of luck with your running. Post all your runs. You never know who you inspire.